Hi everyone and welcome. Oh. Hi everyone and welcome. I'm Debbie Cantor and I'm here tonight with Amy Herzog and
Hi, everyone.
Melanie Mincer.
Hello.
And we are the North Shore College Consulting Team. We're thrilled to be joined tonight by Dr. Jed Applerouth, the founder of Applerouth Tutoring Services, which is now in its 20th year. Jed has a background in business and educational psychology with an undergraduate degree from Wharton and a PhD from Georgia State. Jed is also a trained artist and has merged his counseling and educational insights, visual talents, and sense of humor into a highly effective and original method for teaching academic subjects, coaching executive functioning, and preparing students for college and grad school admissions tests. Jed continually seeks new ways to improve his methods and materials, researching the most innovative strategies to keep his tutors on the cutting edge. Jed is very generous with his time, always offering to share his knowledge with other counselors around the country. We're so grateful to have Jed with us tonight. We learn something new every time we hear from him, and we know you'll find this invaluable. Thank you, Jed.
Debbie, thank you so much. So everybody, glad you're out here tonight, and we're going to talk for about 40 minutes or so about some of the key skills that are involved with executive functioning, and we'll define it, talk about it. If you're on this webinar, you probably have some background, some exposure to what this is. You may know that someone in your family needs some support with this, and often, all of us need some tweaking. There's definitely, these are skills that we can learn, enhance, and master over time. So let's jump in, and if there are questions, honestly, during, feel free to write into the Q&A or the chat. I'm happy to answer questions as we go, and we'll have some dedicated time at the end as well. All right, so let's begin. And the first thing is defining it. What is it? And these functions, they're processes in terms of for managing oneself, one's environment, one's resources, for accomplishing tasks, achieving goals, and so forth. These involve organizing, planning, thinking through solutions, cognitive flexibility, those kind of things. And what's important is, at a foundational level, these are skills. These can be developed and improved. Everybody has a baseline level, and a lot of this is, in fact, heritable. I was reading recently a book on genetics and looking at some of the research, and EF skills, if there's a student who has EF challenges, probably going to be a parent or a grandparent where they share some of the same challenges. There's all these twin studies, and the identical twins, this is very heritable. It's like over 90%, with twin studies. So the functions, they're located in the frontal cortex, and this is the part of the brain that's going to develop later, and typically last. It's one of the last parts to develop as you have other skills that are coming online. And I've worked with students for a long time in this space, and I'm working with parents who have kids who are 13 or 14, and I explain to them, wait a couple years, and even without any intervention, they're going to get better at this. Because the neurons are actually starting to get more myelin, more connections are forming, and they're going to get better. So even a very disorganized 12-year-old, may become a much more organized 17-year-old, and then even better at 24. And so even without training interventions, but when kids are struggling, interventions can help. They can help bolster, support, be scaffolds, and so forth. And so the key functions that we'll talk about tonight, I'm looking at planning, prioritization, time management, self-monitoring, inhibition, goal setting, follow through, and underpinning these, you have the issues of working memory, really undergirds a lot of this. Can I hold things in memory and not forget, my backpack, my assignment? I was going to ask the teacher and I forgot. Cognitive flexibility, being able to pivot, shift, adjust in different conditions, and then is self-control, self-regulation, self-management. And so definitely a lot of overlap here between these skills, and then you have the social emotional learning, which is a big topic in school these days as well. So when it comes to these different skills, everybody has their own levels. And if you look at even sisters and brothers, siblings, some of them may be phenomenal at planning, but not as good at prioritizing. And you have certain strengths and certain areas of weakness, which is very natural. And there's no hierarchy. There's no this is any more important or. But they're all just different facets of self-management regulation. And there are certain students who are really good at certain things, but they fall through at the very end, or they have a hard time starting. There's all these different areas. And if you have a student who has ADHD, that diagnosis essentially indicates that there are challenges here with EF skills. And so that's just part of the diagnosis in terms of inhibition, in terms of attention, and so forth. So the very Peg Dawson, she's an author of this Smart but Scattered and then follow-up books, talks about two levels. Like there's a foundational skills, that's self-regulation, that's your impulses, inhibition, your emotions, your attention, and starting tasks. And then the more advanced skills, higher level skills, planning, prioritization, time management, metacognition, being aware of oneself. And one thing, interestingly, working with kids over time, like of all the different skills in high school, middle school, one of the most challenging tasks that involves a lot of executive functioning is writing. The act of writing is an area I've seen students who are very, very bright. And this is not intelligence. IQ is one thing, but EF skills and the ability to bring your intelligence and structure and focus and prioritize and do the right thing at the right time, these are often quite different. There are kids who are brilliant, who are challenged in these areas. And so writing, I've had very smart kids come in and you start dumping information. And there's no pre-thought, there's no structuring, there's no system. It's just blah, here it is. And it's helping kids learn how to use their executive function. How do I plan? How do I organize information? How do I create segues? These are EF skills and so forth. And when you get better at this, for sure, this helps you academically. There's no question. And there are people who've conceptualized the suite of skills here as the hidden curriculum, that students who have these skills, they are going to have benefits in every single area of academics. But also this goes into other areas of your life in terms of activities beyond school. I'm working with a senior right now who's about to, graduate. He's up in Jersey, and we're looking at him having to manage his own schedule, having to manage his appointments. He has to work, goes to the dermatologist. He's on Accutane. He has to, manage schedules for the blood work and the derm visits and other things, and also managing his emails back and forth with school. He was just, he had his ED acceptance to Northeastern. He's going there next year, but managing all those emails. And so his parents, thankfully, are shifting some of the burden from themselves onto him, which is great, because one of the challenges is when parents take too much on, and the students, they really aren't developing these skills. And then they go off to college and it's not pretty. And that's where we get phone calls, we get parents calling, students who were so reliant on the parents swooping in, saving, structuring, organizing for them. And then the kids are by themselves having to do things, sign leases, sign up for things, registration, and it gets messy. And so it's important, when I'm working with a sophomore or a junior or a senior parent, talking about the future, which isn't that far away, when these students have to become independent, autonomous. And by getting better at these skills, in the short term, for sure, the grades go up. That's great, but I'm trying to build life skills and build more independence, more autonomy. So if you get better at this, organizing, prioritization, time management, self-regulation, this helps you with everything. And this goes on for years and years. So to me, investing in these skills, it's very valuable, and it pays dividends for a long time. And there are many constructs that are related. Like we didn't talk about executive function 25 years ago. This is a relatively new concept. As we're reframing, reconceptualizing different ideas. This guy Elkanon Goldberg began talking about the executive brain. And there's another self-regulated learning is also another construct. And the pieces there's a lot of overlap: motivation, metacognition, goal orientation, time management. And so a lot of these things kind of work together. Metacognition, Peg Dawson, she said this was like one of the capstones of EF. And what this is the ability to reflect upon your own thinking, to really get a sense of what you need to think, to learn. And one of the most important things I do with students is I'm going to stop and ask them to explain, how did things go? What happened? What'd you learn? What'd you get? Things didn't go wrong. You didn't turn your assignment in. Let's go through what happened. You got a 74 on the quiz. Let's go back and talk about all the pieces and the steps. Like, how did you study? Where? How long? Did you have what you needed? And you're getting kids to begin thinking about things. So many students who are struggling, what they're not doing is they're not reflecting. They're not learning from their experience. And metacognition is you slow them down and begin to point them and direct their attention backwards to begin to learn from their mistakes and from their errors to get better. That's really a key thing. Self-awareness is honestly one of the linchpins of this work. And that's through dialogue and discourse and through self-understanding. What am I good at? Where am I weak at? Do I need supports in certain areas? I have students who try to manage their schedules in their own heads, and then things start dropping. But if they don't begin to see the pattern, understand, okay, I need more supports, I need better systems, then they're not going to change. And so they're all, you have to stop and look back and reflect. And this reflection, again, it's what can I learn? Can we explore this? And this self-inquiry becomes a habit, which then makes them better at many things going forward. So when you're working with a student who has EF challenges and deficits, you're going to have failures. You're going to have mistakes. They're not going to turn something in. They're not going to prepare. They'll be surprised by a quiz tomorrow or a test, show up and get a 45 on it. And it's just, they didn't write it down. They didn't plan for it. They expected it to be light and it was really hard. They didn't realize this reading would take 3 hours, not half an hour. And they saved it. They were playing around on TikTok or on chat, Snapchat until like 11 o'clock, and then they don't have enough time. And so part of it is framing what happened through the lens of curiosity versus judgment. Like failure is going to happen, and I don't want to come at them from a place of of judgment and shame. And I want to let's talk about what happened. Let's explore it together. Can we learn from this? Actually, I'm going to skip that slide. It's Catherine. But John Dewey is an important researcher, thinker, philosopher. And again, this focus on reflection. He said, you don't learn from your experience, but you learn from the reflection upon the experience. And that to me is very profound, very wise. And a lot of the work that I'm working with students, it's where we are reflecting, and I'm demonstrating, modeling, teaching them how to reflect back and think about what happened last time, what do we learn, and how do we go forward. So when a few grab bag pieces here, that you have to become adaptable and shift and pivot. So now we're entering the second semester, and the things that worked first semester may not work this semester, especially if you're changing classes, you're onto a new, I have students splitting micro versus macro. Now it's a whole new model, new approach, and you have to be able to pivot as things change. With tolerating some frustration, some challenges, and taking some risks, learning how to be more flexible with their experience. Some students with EF deficits or challenges may present as being not so motivated. And I've seen this before where they, are you wondering, are they not trying very hard? Do they not care about school? What's going on? And in most cases, what we're experiencing is there are a lack of skills. And then from frustration, from past experiences, past failures, they begin to not associate their effort with good outcomes, and they stop trying so hard. And so part of it, one of the key things is you have to start to begin giving them some success, building in some small wins, and then reflecting and celebrating those small wins as they begin to recalibrate their ability level. But that initial sense of these kids aren't motivated, if you scratch beneath the surface, often they're previous failures or frustration, and then some skills that are lacking. That's how I frame things. So again, we talked about not having shame, because all of my students with EF challenges are going to forget something. They're going to screw up on a quiz or a test, not turn something in. That's just part of the work. And the frame here is that they have lagging skills, or as some would say, they have unsolved problems, not inherently they're flawed in any way. Okay. Wendy Bartniole, she's a thinker, educator, teacher, talks about a lot of our kids who have EF challenges additionally have some sensory challenges. And I've seen this with my students, and even, with my own stuff, where getting the environment right is really meaningful, really important. Some of my students who are grappling with EF, they can't work in an environment with too much auditory stimulation, too much noise. They need to have a quiet space. Some students need to have music on. They need to have noise canceling headphones. One of my students last year needed to actually bounce a ball against the wall or move around, which is fine. And they needed a certain level of movement to be able to focus, and trying to inhibit that desire to move was taking up a lot of cognitive resources. So learning how to let them build the environment in which they can be who they are. If they need to fidget, find a place where you can fidget, or find a way that doesn't disrupt others, but not trying to fight that. So learning how to work with yourself, and again, self-reflection, self-awareness. It's learning, what do I need? One of my students, Charlie, he's now a freshman in college. They've been working for a while together. And he found that, you know what, in his college environment, he doesn't work well in his room, doesn't work well in his dorm. And then when he goes to the library, he gets so much more done. And in that environment with people around, someone to talk to take breaks, it helps him focus. He calls it having a body double. Having another human being around makes him focus. Lovely, go get that. I also have a student I'm working with this year who, again, he's getting very little done at home, but at school, he gets almost all of his work finished. And that's great. At home, there are a million distractions and video games and whatnot, and all the apps he's on. But at school, before he leaves, he's able to finish almost all his work, and that's great. But it's learning, what environments will be best for you. What do you need? So some of the 5 keys that the top skills. When you're working with a student who's grappling with EF challenges, it's all about your relationship with them, trying to help them, support them, meet them where they are. Sharon, Celine, I've given numerous talks with Sharon, also a doctor of psychology. And the 4 C's she talks about working with EF kids who are challenged: having compassion, collaboration, you're working with them, they're problem solving, you're demonstrating for them that they have resources, strengths, you're putting, versus I'm the expert, I teach you, it's let's collaborate. Being consistent with them is important with your sessions, keeping things regulated, and then also celebration of the small victories. And when you have small victories and you attend to them and talk about them and analyze them and say, this was great, you got an 85. What did you do? What behaviors did you do? And you have them really focus on their efforts as tied to the outcomes, and they can begin to build those loops, make those connections. That's really important. So you don't brush off or downplay a success. You attend to it, you focus on it, talk about it, and celebrate it as well. And so it's collaboration, problem solving. You're modeling problem solving for them. How do we, what have you tried? What's worked for other people? These kind of things. And you're solving, and as you begin to solve some of these problems, other problems in their life start getting solved too. Because again, these skills generalize greatly. As you begin to get one thing right in terms of how to manage your time or organize, more things begin to go right as well in their other spaces, other areas. And so you always want to talk with the student and get them thinking, brainstorming. Do you have any ideas, things you've tried, haven't tried? We're going to be teammates here together, but I want to put more focus on versus me being the expert coming down high. It's let's have a discussion and let me, I'm kind of guiding, but you're contributing tremendously as part of the process. And so we want to encourage students to think about how they do what they do. And so their process. And so what strategies you used, what did you learn? This is from Jack Naglieri, also from the researcher. And so you're getting them thinking about, again, reflection is again and again one of the key things. And then the celebration piece, it's incremental successes, the little things. You ended up, taking down all your homework. You ended up, bringing the books back, whatever they were having challenges with. As they begin to make corrections, you celebrate them. It's not everything's perfect just yet, but there is incremental progress, and you draw attention to those and celebrate those as they're rebuilding their sense of self and efficacy and competencies. So, and the students, they have to own it. And this is something where I've seen parents take on too much. And when I begin working with these kids, I want the parents to begin to withdraw some of their support and attention so the students can begin to learn how to, manage these things themselves. Because I always talk about, in a year or 2 or 3, they're on their own. And the more you do for them, it's going to be more of a stark contrast once they get off to college. And so working with the student, you have to, talk about the outcomes and what's driving them and what do they want. I've had students who the parents want one thing, but the kids, I ask them, like, what is success for you? And, what would you be happy with this semester, with this class, these grades? And I'm going to always write down their goals. They set the goals, and I'm going to reference those goals again and again and again that they set and they establish for themselves. Making sure it is their goals, not mine, not the parents, but getting a sense of, what they're trying to accomplish for themselves. And then really having to withhold this desire for us to fix and jump in and swoop in and fix things. And they complain about a teacher or an assignment before you jump in and solve it. Stop, empathize, connect with them, and then see, is there a way we can dialogue? And I'm going to often encourage students. I'm going to push them some if what they're doing is not yielding the returns they want. There's the zone of growth where there's definitely some discomfort, but that's okay. We're going to try different things. I have students who they don't use systems. And then I'm going to try to encourage them. Can we try to use a calendar system? Can we try, whether it's on your phone or whether it's paper or 11 by 17 calendar, can we experiment and get feedback? And so I'm pushing you beyond what's comfortable, because right now you're not really thriving at your full level. And then things are going to go wrong. They always do. And part of it is, the students are responsible, but we're not going to shame them or judge them, but we'll talk about that, what happened, where things go off the rails, and then talk about what, things we learned from that. The next piece is, I think that seems very simple to an adult, may be not so simple to someone who's 14 or 15 and struggling. And so if someone presents with a task, you aren't doing this thing, and versus before you go in and try to solve it or correct it, really find out exactly where the breakdown is taking place, because there are many, many parts of a process where things can break down. And so if a student isn't turning in their homework, or they're, whatever it is, and the first thing is, where do you write down your homework? Can you show me that? Is there a book? Do you use on your phone, an app, a certain place in your notebook? Where does it live? Is it always the same place? Can you always find it? And are you writing things down? I've seen students come to me with backpacks, and I say, where's your homework? And they dump out the backpack. And then it's like there's loose paper and straight, like things are folded and crumpled. I'm like, oh my God, that's your system. And it's amazing. They can find anything that they're getting by with B's and C's, but there's just not much structure. And so that's the first piece. Okay, so there's not a dedicated space to make for this lives. That's our first problem. And so I want to find out exactly where the breakdown is taking place. And oftentimes, when students are having breakdowns, there are points of transition. Kids may be great at home. They may be great in the classroom, but some of these transitions, do I bring the thing I need for the classroom, or going from the classroom, the locker, or then from school back to home? Or I have kids who go to the gym, they forget their gym bag, they forget their basketball, they left it at the gym, things like that. And so it's the transitions that we have to often help them through with reminders, writing things down, using your phone, other things, because the pivots are often where things are shifting, where there are challenges. And students, some of my students, there are 3 phases of task completion. Task initiation is starting. That's a skill in the EF world. Task persistence, that's going to be sticking through, even though, inhibiting other impulses, desires to go and do other things. And then finally, completion. And I've had kids who take things through all the way, then they don't turn it in, or they forget it at home. I have students who can't start, and they spend too long, whether that's from a sense of, perfectionism, or they're not ready to start, or there's something else that's more compelling to them, or they're just in a very distraction ridden environment. And there's no timeline on when to start things. And so part of it's helping identify where are things breaking down again, and let's create strategies for finishing, or for starting, or for how do you maintain focus, and for how long. And Sarah Ward, our EF expert, talks about the future sketch. When you start with the end goal in mind and you go backwards, the resources you're going to need, the timing, the support you're going to need. And EF challenge kids often don't think like this. They don't think through all the pieces. Oh, office hours are Wednesday. The test is on Thursday. I should probably, make sure I save time to see her on this date. And I may need this book. And so you actually help them plan all the things they're going to need if they're looking at this quiz or test coming up. And this self-imagination going through time and space is really important. Systems. I've never done work with a student with EF issues without working on their systems. And I was doing this just yesterday, helping students. And I personally am a big fan of using digital like calendars and organizers, but some kids like paper, and that's totally fine. All that matters is, are they going to actually use the system? And whatever you as parents have doesn't matter so much. Their siblings doesn't matter, but it's what they're going to use. That's all that matters. And so organization, it's organizing, mentally, like before you start writing, organizing your digital space so it's not confusing or there's distractions, interruptions, and also your physical space in your environment. And EF challenge students, they need a certain level of structure. One of my students, again, college kid, and he talked about in his room, like things were all over the place, and he had laundry all over the place, and his organizer was actually under his laundry on his desk. And so until his roommate actually picked up his laundry. Then he saw the organizer, and then he got things done, but there was just too much chaos in his physical space. So normally I don't care if the kids make their beds, but if their workspace is really cluttered and they can't find things in their workspace, that becomes an issue. I definitely want to have a relatively clean workspace, so you know where things are, and how to find things you need. But organization, the tracking is tremendously important. Tracking and then planning out. So you have a planner, whether it's paper or digital, both are fine, your day planner. One of the important things is you have a planner which has you at least the week view. Some of my students are just thinking about what's tomorrow, and that works for a time until you get to more advanced projects, assignments, test quizzes, and later in high school. That might work in middle school, what's due tomorrow. But once you're in high school, it becomes more challenging. And then your folders, the things always go in this side of the binder, that side of the binder, your backpack, your inbox, and learning how to make sure things are structured in a way and labeled so you know where to find stuff. Really important. And habits are everything. How to nudge them towards better routines until they become automatic. That I always study, during this free period or after school. I go work out at the Y, play some basketball, come home, have a snack, and then I do some work for an hour and a half, take a break. And so there's some kind of regularity and there's some sense of routine. And as the kids get better routines, they become more effective and their grades tend to go up. And too much stimulation, especially kids who have a lot of, visual stimulation issues. If there's a lot going on, it'll be hard to focus. And most everybody, if you give them a cluttered environment, most folks have to then inhibit all that information coming at them, and that takes up some cognitive capacity. So you want to have a relatively, again, their bed can be a mess, but their space in front of them, their workspace, I want it relatively free of distractions. A little bit more spare tends to be better for the average student. And everyone remembers Marie Kondo, started the pandemic and before, and began to reduce. And a backpack with like 20 pencils. Do we need 20? Can we do 2? We have all this extra paper. Can I downsize and only have this much? I'm trying to keep one thing, everything simple. And so that and also with your inbox, keeping it a little bit clean. So good systems, relatively simple, organization, good labels in order to find things. And a system that works is one that that kids use. So you want to differentiate. For you, this calendar is perfect. I have students who they use a big 11 by 17 calendar on the wall, and they have the key dates for I have a quiz on Thursday, assignment due Friday, and they see it. In some cases, their parents can see it, but and then that will transfer their daily planner homework onto like the big 11 by 17 wall calendar. And that's fine. And things are circled to start or whatever works. Some kids use color coding. I recommend, I like a lot using the G calendar on Google. And I have different classes with different colors. And so sometimes the schools give you a calendar, but it's full of too much information that's not relevant. What I really care about is when things are due. And so if yellow is chemistry and red is is history, English is blue. And then I see when things are due. And also if I break things out over days. If I have a paper due, I want the rough draft on Monday, outline here. I want to proof it on Wednesday. And you start actually, breaking tasks down is really helpful for kids. So they don't end up, and also have them estimate how much time it'll take to do this. And begin, again, thinking ahead is that future sketch, helping kids learn how to do this skill. And again, if you may have the world's most amazing system, if they don't use it, it's worthless. And I've had kids, everything set up on their online calendar, but then they don't use it. I'm like, okay, well, what do you need? And what do you prefer? And for this one student may be paper. Okay, paper, let's find you a good calendar organizer and we'll work with that. And so, it doesn't matter what works for me, it's what works for you. So again, I mentioned big calendars, binders, planners. There are many ways you can get them from school, or you can order them online on Amazon. And your digital environment is also very meaningful, that students know, especially if they have certain places where they're going to upload to a certain class or download things or videos or resources, and then everything is organized. They know how to find stuff, so they aren't searching through emails or other places. Having well organized your links and your favorites. I, for one, could not get by without my calendar for Google. It tells me what's coming up, and I break things out, and also it gives me reminders. 15 minutes till this thing's coming up and also I use my phone, like my phone beeped at 7:45, and here, I'm in Atlanta, so it's a little different time zone. But using the reminders keeps you from being late to the important things, and kids have to learn that, especially kids who tend to be late, learning how to use your tools. And scheduling, I absolutely will work with the students and show them, piece by piece, how to prep for exam week, how, where to put in the breaks, where to put in an hour and a half playtime, talk to your friends, and also how to break things up so that there's no like big 3-hour cram session. We'll do an hour here, change topics, do an hour here, and kind of showing them what a good schedule looks like. Talked about the backpack, simplification is important. And it's honestly so much easier to engineer your environment than trying to change a person. And that if you make a smart environment, if you engineer out distractions and you make things that are necessary, easy to find, easy to locate, then you've already done half the work for yourself. So a good environment makes a tremendous difference. And I've had to work with students, very often, and for years and years and years. I've had kids who are grappling with blending their fun time and their work time. And especially because, a lot of their fun time happens on the same places, the screens, where they have their work requirements. And so it's learning, how do I, take out the distractions if they're on Instagram or if they're on, Snapchat's the big one for most of my kids in high school right now. And how many hours with their Snap stories and their Snap streaks and all those things that they're doing, and they're playing. For young kids, it's Roblox, other things they're playing. But how do I minimize those distractions and work on that? And so you want to have typically a regular study area, and you get this place, what you're doing. And it's important that the area is conducive for studying. Some kids, their room is too full of distractions. They find somewhere else. Others, they'll work in a library, but it's a place that works for you. There's no right or wrong. And, for me, I always play music, and I have for forever, for at least, since college, master's, grad school, work. I had the same soundtrack and same music, and I like to drink tea and I chew gum, and I get in this routine, and it works for me. I have my computer. I know where to find things, so it's important that you don't have too much clutter in your desktop. And then off-task behaviors. You have to know your rabbit holes. And all of my students, and all of you as adults out there on the webinar, you're going to have some ways that you tend to fall into your distraction holes, and whatever it is. And it could be, for me, there are times I go on to news apps and I start diving into news or Wikipedia, and I can spend, and my little thing becomes half an hour. Some students, they want to play a few songs to decompress. They put on Spotify, and then suddenly it's been an hour, and they lost the hour. And, it was relaxing, but they had work to do. Others of my students, they get really into gaming. And one of my students wants to be a gamer in esports. And he starts playing one League of Legends game, but then if it could come 2, 3, 4, 5, if he loses, he gets frustrated. I'm gonna go back in there and play again, and you can lose 2 hours. And so, it's having better boundaries and knowing, how do you get distracted? And so I actually personally use website blockers. I use Stay Focused. That's when I have on this computer right here. And after 15 minutes, I have certain websites, Reuters or CNN, other places. It tells me, shouldn't you be working? And then I'm locked out of that website, which is actually very helpful. On my phone, I have screen time limits, which I've set for certain apps, and you can have it set for a certain time of day, between 4 and 6. All these apps shut down. And my students use this. Some of my students, turn their phones in airplane mode. Other kids have learned to take their phone and dock it in the kitchen where it's charging when they're working, but they understand that when the work time is over, then they can go and play. And let's have breaks. Let's time our work. So after an hour 20, taking a break. And then, let's put it back so it's 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever our division is. So you can't go and spend 4 hours hanging out, but learning how to think about time, how to use time, how to conceptualize time, and also not to overlap things. Seth Perler, very gifted EF coach and mentor, talks about make what's hard, make it easier, more accessible, right in your face, ready to use, and make what's easy, your distractions, games, your phone, harder to access. And so trying to, structure and engineer your environment, because willpower doesn't always work. And if we're hungry or tired or just overworked, willpower breaks down. Using clocks, some students use physical timers. Many of my students use their watches, which have timing functions if you have an Apple Watch or they use their cell phones. And that's great. So you're taking a break, 20 minutes and go, and learning how to keep good boundaries so it's not all free flowing. And good divisions. One of my students 15 years ago, and a long time ago, even back then, she was spending 7 hours a night studying, and her parents were like, "What's going on?" And then I began to Alexa, talking to her, Alexandra, and in terms of how do you spend 7 hours on this stuff? And she was getting pretty poor grades. And then I found out, okay, back then she had Facebook open, which isn't as big of a thing these days with kids, but she was on Facebook or she had her cell phone, and she was, really, she was working, but what would have been 3 hours of dedicated work became 7 hours. And so, and my thing is, what you're doing is you're minimizing the quality of both experiences. You're making your worse less effective. You're not doing as well. You have more shallow processing because you're always being distracted, you're not really learning as well. And also your social time, your mind is half on this, half on that, which isn't great either. And so I really want to have a good division of now we're working and now we're playing. And then ultimately you get more, more time to play and more quality time if you keep a better boundary. So it's teaching kids about boundaries with themselves and their work. And finally, you can't talk about self-efficacy and, without talking about the whole person, the holistic experience of how are you doing with exercise. I've had kids, my EF students who, like, during the pandemic, they lost PE and phys ed. And guess what? Their attention began to get compromised. Their grades began dropping. And they realized they began going to the gym and working out, their grades went up. And so part of it is, being able to exercise. It's good for our mental health and it's good for our cognitive function. So that's an important part of EF, is taking care of the body. Sleep is tied to everything good in life, is tied to good, normal, regular sleep. Working memory consolidation, mental health, lower anxiety levels, all these things are tied to sleep. So if students are staying up too late, not getting enough sleep, their EF skills are going to be compromised, period, paragraph. So getting good sleep can do a good bit to solve some of these challenges for many kids. Taking breaks is really important. You can't just work through and power through. The longer you go, things become less efficient and effective, and the learning curve begins to drop. So taking active breaks is really important, and having kids learn how to, it's been 40 minutes, an hour 20, whatever you need, stop, get outside, move your body, stretch, then come back. And it's better for all the outcomes. Self-talk is a big deal, and motivation, helping kids analyze, think about, what messages do you give yourself? I have some students who are very negative. There's some kids I work with who are on the verge of failure, of classes and grades, and their self messages are really negative. And so talking to them about how they talk to themselves, and are they being good inner coaches, or are they judging and shaming themselves? And so, I try to demonstrate positive self-talk, but even listening to what they tell themselves and talking about it and analyzing, helping them with that. Help seeking. Every single student I've ever worked with for EF skills, part of the work is having them learn how to use your resources, recruit help when you need it, how to ask for help, and how to know when you need help. That's part of metacognition. I'm aware that I'm not getting this. I need more support in this area, whether it's from a tutor or from a teacher, or I need another resource and go online. But learning how to not do things alone. Smart people get help. And so this is definitely part of EF, is self-advocacy, is learning how to ask for support when you need it. And because again, when kids go to college, they're going to have to become better at this. How do I get support? How do I find the reading lab, the learning lab, the writing center? How do I find, the peer tutoring? How do I get support for this more advanced math class? And teaching kids how to identify their needs, and then that they're worth getting help. And so the 5 skills, working with students on EF skills, it's about, maintaining that really positive relationship with them, the ownership. The kids have to own it. The parents can't do it for them. That simple tasks may not, in fact, be that simple. There's complexity. When you stop, slow down, ask questions, break things down. Systems, habits, routines, rituals, that you need smart systems to organize yourself, your time, your resources. And then finally, thinking about the body, sleeping, what are you eating, movement, time with your friends. All these things contribute, to the balance and to, ultimately higher performance academically as well. And we have a quiz we offer. It's just a free quiz to get a sense of how you're doing for your students at learn.applerouth.com. /ef.skill-skills-quiz. And we also do these weekly videos we send about EF skills for parents. All right, and we help students with this work, obviously. But it's been a pleasure for me, and I really enjoy it. I think this work, when you help kids get better at this, it's going to help them for this academic year and the year beyond. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and then we'll pivot and see if there are any questions. Those of you who are out there, happy to answer questions about your kids, things things you see, how can we support them? And please feel free to take a minute. You can type anything in the Q&A window or the chat. I have them both open here. Okay, we talk a little bit about the difference between poor executive function skills and poor study skills. And there's definitely an overlap here in terms of, but executive function really, it transcends studying for a certain class. It's, in terms of higher level organization and management, because study skills, what that entails is studying for a certain class, certain ways of studying, certain techniques, certain methods of studying for, then also, how long should I study, in what context? So there definitely is some overlap there, but EF is, a student may, forget their book or whatever it is, or they may totally miss and forget they have a quiz at all. And so there are some higher level things that involve EF, but study skills, it's going to, there definitely is overlap in like your environment and so forth. But we can definitely tweak how you study. But EF skills are, I think, more all encompassing. It's kind of more life skill. Okay. Any other questions? Can you comment about EF students in ADD? Yes. So when it comes to attention deficit hyperactive disorder, that every single student who has a diagnosis of ADHD, it has some challenges with EF in terms of attentional regulation, inhibition, cognitive flexibility, all these things. So if your student is grappling with ADHD and they're having, whether it's the inattentive subtype or, the hyperactivity that's, regulating oneself, one's impulses, or managing, sustaining attention, focus, learning how to keep distractions at bay, these are EF skills. So essentially every kid with ADHD has some work to do on learning how to enhance and improve their attention, their focus, manage their environment. And one of the typical things they do with ADHD is give kids more time, but there's more to it than that. It's, a lot of my kids who are ADHD, like they have to think about their environment more closely. And some of my kids who need a pivot, need to have silence, or they had a clock sweeps or ticks and it bothers them. And let's make sure we get you the right environment. So definitely every single student who has ADHD has some work to do in this area. Okay, now how much does the student need to be motivated to improve their EF skills? Okay, so I would say it's pretty important. And I've seen students, I've worked with some students who are not into it. And the parents, you can't drag them to this, because we're, if they're not going to want to keep a calendar, or I've seen, the challenges of this. Some of my students rock and roll and they get it and they want to improve. But in some cases they're begrudgingly, they don't want to be in the sessions. And those are for sure the most challenging kind of students. And so, I would say, yes, you're going to have to, I'm going to kind of get my focus back on there. It's important that a student has enough pain that they're going to want to change their behaviors in terms of like Prochaska states of change. And I often ask my kids in terms of like, how are things going? And, is it going the way you imagine, the way you want? How's it feel? And one of my students talks about that it's the fire drills, that, he's getting okay grades, but there's always chaos. And there's always emergencies and he falls behind. And then he has an IEP, he catches up, but it's like there's a week or 2 or 3 of crazy stress. His parents are all over him. And then now he's like, I want things to be different. And so part of it's, how can you help me? And so there has to be some level of, I want this to improve. And if not, it is challenging work if the kids don't want to be part of the work. They have to be willing to embrace it, try different things on. Or the parents have to be really, really committed, but it's not as much fun when the kids don't want to be there. And in my experience, the outcomes aren't as good typically. So yeah, buy-in matters. And that's one of the reasons why when I'm working with a student, I don't come from shame. I don't come from judgment. I really don't. I want to meet them and make them feel like I'm an ally. I'm going to meet them where they are and not come at them from on high or above them. And then they, if they believe I'm on their side and I want, what are your goals? What do you want? Forget what your parents want, but what's important to you? What's meaningful to you? And what do you want to accomplish? So they see me as someone, I can be a resource to them, not to their parents. How long does a typical EF program last? So when it comes to EF work, I'll start off with a 45-minute session for students, never more than that. And, for my intro intake, and pretty quickly, I'm going to downshift to half-an-hour sessions. I like shorter sessions. And in the very beginning, if someone's really in crisis or struggling, then we'll do twice a week. But most of my students now, after a month or so, 2 months the most, we're doing once a week. And in some cases, some of my more advanced students, we're down to a 15-minute check-in. Once things are really, rocking and rolling, they don't need as much support, because the whole point of the work is to help kids become independent and autonomous. Now, I don't want to be a crutch for them ever. And if I am a crutch, I'm a bad EF coach. So it's not hand-holding, it's teaching someone how to be more, how to manage themselves, their resources, take care of themselves, know what they need. And I'm there, of course, for exams and helping them structure some of the big stuff. But, I've done my job when I don't, kids don't need me at all. And so when I get fired, I love it. When, they're off and running and they're doing their thing, it's like our work isn't as valuable anymore. I'm like, beautiful. That is that's success. I don't want to be here for a year or 2 years. That isn't my role. It really is to help build skills, and then I'm done. I can let you thrive. Okay. Any other questions? These are so far good questions. And also just in terms of when this work starts, we do a lot of this work in middle school and high school, and some in college. I've tried working with a fifth grader, and it's a different kind of work. In terms of, it depends on the student and their level. You ask them how was school, fine, or so, which can be also for a high school student. But in terms of, in my experience, the work is more rich as the cognitive load of tasks gets larger, as they have to balance more things. And then, and oftentimes kids can do it. They can balance things very well until certain pain points. And going to middle school, that's one transition. Going to ninth grade, that's a transition. And then going from 10th to 11th, when you begin entering AP classes, IB classes, more advanced classes, that's also a pain point. And then, of course, going to college, when suddenly it's just you, and the teachers don't hold your hand the same way. You have long-term assignments. And if you don't manage them over time, then suddenly you have this huge thing due tomorrow, and then it's really stressful and challenging. So again, going into middle school, going into high school, that 11th grade transition, and often people call us after the midterms, and then suddenly they're struggling, and that's when the parents call and say, we're really in trouble now. But I love if you can start earlier, before there's crisis. But oftentimes it is that report card, and the parents freak out. It's like, oh my gosh, we have C's, or we're failing, or it's like they need help immediately. That's when they get phone calls, and that's all right too. But it's always nicer and less stressful if you can start a little before and do some front loading, so you don't hit that point of crisis. Okay. Any last question or questions before we tie it up for the night? How do you think the pandemic has impacted EF skills? That's interesting. Well, the pandemic put much greater burdens on students' ability to regulate themselves in their home environments without the cues and context of school. So when they were working at home, I saw a lot of strong students fall apart. And often teachers graded more leniently, but suddenly it was on them to manage themselves. And again, a lot of them, they weren't exercising, in the same, like there wasn't like structured activities or sports, things that made them feel good. And there was kind of some students languished, and then things weren't, there was a malaise kicked in, and I saw, and my brother lives in Toronto as a teacher, and he said up there, they just reinstated a new online learning. They can't be in school anymore. And he said he is pulling all the tricks out of his bag, and all people, some of these kids, they hear they're back online and they are just so checked out. And it's often like demoralizing to spend, again, for an hour, it's nothing, but to spend 8 hours a day or whatever is looking at a screen without your friends or your peers in your room, it's really hard. And so I think that puts a greater burden on students to inhibit. And often, students, my brother said he knew half the kids would be looking at their phones below the screen, or they'd be entertaining themselves or distracting themselves because they couldn't maintain that focus without the other cues from in the classroom, where, and so they'd be doing other things or doodling and so for sure, it exposed more weaknesses in EF skills. And some kids got into some really bad habits, and it's learning, how do I get back? But once you change context, you bring a different brain to that context. So suddenly in school again, they know how to be students in school, but at home without all the support, and it was much more challenging for a lot of our students. But thankfully, it seems like we're about to wrap it up, and there should be much more online learning, hopefully, because it's hard. Some kids thrive, and there are maybe 1 out of 6 students that they love at home learning. They can't get in, they don't like the social anxiety or the pressure or whatever it is. I have a niece like this. It's like, I could do online learning for the next 10 years. And those kids are the ones who may do online degrees for college and so forth. They do very well. But the majority of our students, they need to be with their peers. And so much what's happening in school is social. It's not learning based. It's learning how to be with your friends and connect and take all the cues and everything else, not just looking at a screen for 8 hours a day. Anyone else? Any final thoughts? Why don't I back up here and let you guys, Amy, Melody, Debbie, if you want to jump in.
We really appreciate you spending time with us tonight. Everything you said was so spot on from what we're seeing with students, especially, this pandemic part at the end. We're definitely seeing an increase of need for this help. Just being online for so long, they've forgotten some of the skills that they once had in the classroom. And it was making it really hard transition, both for the students who started college after a couple of years during a pandemic and the high school students right now. So very timely information. We really appreciate you sharing all that with us.
Sure, of course.
Do you want to share your contact information, or anyone can contact us if they need Jed's contact information?
For us, we're pretty basic. So I think info@Applerouth, just that's how you find us if you have any questions, inquiries. We're here. And if you need support with this work, that's what we do.
Great. Thank you so much for your time.
Hey, you're welcome. All right, y'all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.